everybody, it's Cash. Welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. Today I am going to do the transition pictures for the Greek philosopher Socrates, who died in 399 BC at the age of 71 of hemlock poisoning administered by himself. I've not done the transition pictures for anybody who's died of poisoning before, so this was particularly interesting. Many people talk about Socrates as this wise old man from ancient times, but actually he never wrote anything. There are no Socrates books. He would have these philosophies and principles, and he would depend on his students, one of whom was Plato, who wasn't as bright as Socrates, really. But he would depend on his students to write the stuff down. And it became known as the Socratic method, whereby you had a question and answer session where Socrates, pretending that he knew nothing, would ask moral questions of the other person, and the whole subject would be fleshed out that way. Now, what's fascinating about that to me was that when I was in radio for all those years, I used the Socratic method, as it's called, to interview people. Instead of reading their book beforehand or learning about what they did or anything, I would go along completely cold, completely ignorant, and I would learn from scratch, putting myself in the position of the audience. It proved to be very, very satisfactory as a technique for interviewing people, but it was the Socratic method. It was from Socrates basically pretending he was ignorant and then asking questions of another person to flesh out a particular subject. He was not an attractive man by any means and was quite reviled in society by many, many people. In fact, in the end, he was put on trial for corrupting the minds of youth, because he brought what the authorities considered to be godlessness to society. And he basically was ruining people's lives with these ideas that went beyond contemporary thinking. So he was put on trial, he went to jail, and the penalty was to administer hemlock poison to himself, which he did. And that's how he died. So when I went into his energy, and the way I did this was how I'm doing this now with these people, I kind of get a general feel of what they look like from statues or whatever, which of course may not be exact. But then I simply ask about this person. And if pictures come, I'm just trusting the universe to have provided me with the pictures relative to that person. So I just said, Socrates transition, and waited for pictures to come. And they were very, very revealing, almost sad, actually. When I went into his energy, there was a manhole in the ground in front of him with a manhole cover over here. And Socrates slid into it and pulled the manhole cover over the hole. And then he went into this, I guess it's a cell. I mean, it's a bit on the nose, but that's really what it felt like, a small room, and waited. There were beams of light, little shafts of light coming in through the manhole cover. Remember, this is metaphorical, not real. There wasn't a real manhole cover. But there were shafts of light coming in. And as he sat there, just waiting it out in this black room, the lights coming through the manhole cover started to go out one by one until the whole place was dark. And he had to fumble his way forward in the pictures just using his hands. The tunnel was very short, so death must have come very, very quickly. And there were some steps down, and as he walked down the steps, metaphorically, things got lighter. And there was that cave that I always see. With almost every single person I see, this kind of meet and greet cave, as I choose to call it. Only this time, the floor was covered with a thick, cloying, foggy blanket that felt really heavy and almost immersed him and dragged him down. Maybe that's the effect of poison on the brain or the system. It actually impregnates your consciousness and weighs the whole thing down. Because he really didn't know what to do. He was just so heavy and unable to move, and it felt really rough. And then suddenly it didn't. Suddenly it cleared. So, I mean, you don't have a body anymore as your consciousness crosses over and you transition. So maybe as his body finally died, all the clouds cleared up as well. None of it really sat very easily with him. He didn't like the idea of surrendering to this, so I'm assuming that there's a tremendous sense of injustice within him. He didn't want to go, and yet he'd been made to go for simply expressing ideas and exercising his freedom of thought. There was a tremendous sense of injustice. It felt as though he was moving out of a density of existence, the mortal existence, the life of form he'd had, that wasn't suited to his emotions or his psyche. I think some people find it very difficult living in the 3D form. They find that they're not built for that. And he seemed to be one of those. There was disappointment here, I felt, as if he had sold himself short in some way. He came from a rich family, so things should have been quite comfortable, but maybe that led to complacency. He didn't feel as if he was valued, or he felt that the people around him weren't bright enough to really understand the points he was trying to make. Everybody was of a lesser intellect. Getting out of this soupy mist of the poison felt like stripping off a frogman's suit, you know, those tight rubber suits. It felt like that, stripping that off, or climbing out of a onesie once you get out of bed, or it's just one of those things that had kept him in. And now finally he was free. And I don't think he was a happy man. I don't think he was a contented man. I think he was very frustrated and very disappointed and believed that he could have risen much higher. But then he started to climb the tunnel, and this was fascinating too. He really had trouble getting very far up the tunnel. This metaphorical, symbolic tunnel leads to the light, where we all ascend to the next level of our existence. But he had real trouble getting up this tunnel. I felt that he was suddenly struck down by a realization in consciousness of what he'd tolerated while he was alive, the burdens he'd carried, the restrictions he'd suffered, every injustice he'd endured, every stupid action of people around him that he'd had to tolerate. All that came back to haunt him. And ultimately he fell to the metaphorical ground. And I felt cold stone, which of course doesn't exist in these pictures really, but it's like cold stone pressed against my cheek. Every bit of life from the mortal side had been sucked out of him in this sense of defeat, of resignation to a life that had been so unsatisfactory. I mean, now Socrates is revered, but back then it was just a guy with ideas, and his ideas hadn't been accepted, and his life had been hard, and he just sank under the weight of that realization. And I couldn't get him up. I waited and waited, and nothing really happened, and then he began to move. But he wasn't moving of his own volition, which was curious. It was as if there was a conveyor belt on the ground, and he was moving because the conveyor belt was moving. He was being pulled forward in spite of himself. He didn't have the strength of character, strength of consciousness to move forward. And when he reached the cave I see with the light in it, it was as if grace said, hey, you gave it your best shot. You did what you could with what you had. Don't be so hard on yourself. Come on. Give yourself a break. That kind of feeling. And I swear what I thought I saw was like, what do you describe it? It was almost as if there was some kind of cosmic dance partner, like in ballroom dancing. Some dance partner came out of the light, extended a hand, and said, come on, let me lead. Just follow, come on. And he was lifted up in that kind of way by this energy of rejuvenation, of appreciation, of encouragement, and lured into the light. It took divine initiative, the strength of that, to induce him to let go of the burdens he'd carried in life that maybe very few people knew about. But now he was supposedly free of them and could surrender to the process. He had to be coaxed into accepting the invitation of the universe to rise to a higher level of energy. Such was the weight on him from his lifetime. And also the effect of the poison, I assume. I think we're very hard on ourselves. And during our lifetime, instead of saying, hey, I've got breath and I've got life and I can see colors and I can hear sounds, all the stuff that we take for granted because we become so involved in dramas and demands and worries and obligations and all the things that are involved in living a regular life in the 3D world. We lose sight of the blessings we have, the benefits we are being granted simply by winning this lottery and being allowed to be alive. Now, maybe Socrates' life was incredibly hard. I don't know. It's too long ago for anybody to really know. But he seemed too smart for his own good and unappreciated. And he had one of those intellects that means life is particularly difficult because you can't find anybody to match your intellect. Everybody's of a lower intellect. And this made it incredibly difficult for him. That's what this whole thing felt like. And he didn't appreciate what he had. He placed his focus, his concentration on what he didn't have. And of course, if you do that, the law of attraction kicks in and you bring into your life even more reasons to feel dissatisfied with what you have, rather than being grateful for what you have, which draws in positive consequences and circumstances and people and so on. You probably know I've written a book about this called The Illustrated Law of Attraction, but these are core principles of any law of attraction book. You draw to yourself the things of an energy that reflect the energy you're putting out. And clearly he put out the energy of dissatisfaction and frustration. And that's what he drew into his life, more reasons to be dissatisfied. But he was free of it eventually, after Grace stepped up and said, you did what you could. Come on, don't be hard on yourself. And the eternal cosmic dance partner led him into the light. So interesting, and not what I expected at all. And that's what I learned from Socrates. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time, guys. Bye-bye.